I'm going to hit the record button. And then probably during the course of the presentation, if folks can put themselves on mute and probably turn off their camera, that would be helpful as well. Yep. So I guess why don't we go ahead and start off. So for those of you joining the call, if you wouldn't mind, please turning off your audio or muting yourself, and then also turning off video. We will get started. Language confirmation. Is that just me? Does anybody else see that? All right. And maybe I can have Peter help me run through the list to make sure everyone's muted. We got people coming and going. All right, so with that, let me give you some background on our center. The Center for Catastrophic Risk Management is a global multidisciplinary group of researchers from academia, government, and industry focused on developing pragmatic solutions to better manage the messy, complex, multi-jurisdictional problems of the 21st century. The group was founded in 2005 in the wake of Hurricane Katrina to conduct fundamental empirical research on the management of catastrophic risk in a wide range of settings. And it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker. Mr. Pitzer is the CEO, founder of SafeMap International. He has a BA and honors degree in psychology, honors in business with his MBA, and is a registered psychometrist. SafeMap is a leading provider of competency-based training solutions for the energy, utility, mining, processing, and manufacturing industries all around the world since 1994. SafeMap designs, develops, and delivers a total safety solution by combining advanced culture analysis, safety leadership, safety techniques, systems, and tools with a range of consulting services that focus on the most critical aspects of safety. In 2016, RiskMap International was launched, which deploys advanced risk management systems and brings risk engineering sciences to bear on a very complex process in any business dealing with risks and threats. SafeMap and RiskMap employ a network of consultants around the world to meet the needs of its clients and operate from shared offices in Australia, Africa, Asia, Europe, South America. And with that, I will hand the baton over to Corrie. Thanks again for presenting to us today.
Thank you very much, Arun. My presentation will be about an hour, 15 minutes, I think. And hopefully in that time, if you could insert questions in the chat room, and after that, I could jump into them as best I can. The central focus of this presentation is the elimination of fatalities. The elimination of fatalities is the grand goal of all organizations in high-risk environments. And the world that I'm from is very much defined by one of the most famous safety philosophers, Yogi Berra, who said famously, in theory and practice are the same, in practice they are not. And this is what I'm going to focus on today, is on case studies and examples from the field. So it's perspectives from the field, from a real world perspective. And how does that maybe inform theory? How does that inform academic understanding from the perspectives that this is coming from? To a large degree, I'm going to talk about the high reliability organization in this presentation, but a different angle on it, what I call the DSO, or the deep safe organization, which I think is a subset of the high reliability organization. It is a process and approach that we didn't start off to design and develop an HRO, but I think it tended and ended up very much in this domain. And furthermore, maybe to set the scene a little bit, I'm going to dabble into the esoteric world of quantum mechanics and relativity. I'm going to try and take the famous equation of Albert Einstein and apply it into this presentation by changing it to E equals mc to the power of 3, and then to even take it a bit further, but to rewrite that formula for you. So r to the power of 3 equals mc to the power of 3. So I'm going to leave that in your memory for a moment, and I'll come back to this at the end and see how I populate and inform this definition. It is important to give you a little bit of background about me and where all of this started and comes from. I'm a native of South Africa originally, and I grew up there, went to university there, studied, and then was looking for a job as a trained psychologist, couldn't find a job, and eventually applied to a big mining company in HR. And I was interviewed over the phone and eventually told I'm going to work on a mine in Rustenburg, which is a massive operation. It had 50,000 people across many shafts here. Impala Platinum was called. And one of the mines was Bafokeng North Mine, and the manager was Mr. Drummond. He was very famous, being a ruthless Irishman who had incredible mining experience but had no time for people. And he had no time for HR. Hated the idea of HR coming into his business. When I walked into his office, I was told, "You're going to get out and get a blasting ticket, young man. You're not going to come and interview people and appoint people if you don't know what they're doing." Well, there's no arguing with Mr. Drummond. His nickname was Gaddafi because he was such a ruthless manager. I ended up on the next morning, second day of my career in HR, on the shaft. I'm going to start my training for a blasting ticket, which was going to take 8 months. And here I go. I'm arriving there at 4:30 in the morning, pitch dark. These mine shaft systems are incredible. It is just amazing what the engineering of this is all about. They hoist these elevators up and down these shafts. That's the hoist over there. And when you I met there by these ruthless looking men, everybody 6'7" and 250 pounds, men that fear nothing. We all bundle into a cage or a skip, and we go down this shaft. And this is what it looks like when you go, and feels like when you go down the shaft.
You're traveling at 6 meters per second. There are 3 shafts. We're going down the first shaft, then we're going to go a long ways, then down the second, and then down the third. You experience your ears blocking now.
Now, when you casually talk there about going down, you go down to the first one, and the second one, and the third one. On a typical shaft in a mine, deep mine in South Africa, you would go down 3,000 feet in a shaft. In that skip, you walk down, you walk to another shaft system, you go down another 3,000 feet, you walk to another one. You can go up to 9,000 feet and then travel through the haulage, the whole road way to your workplace, and we call them drives. These tunnels that gets darker, deeper, until you eventually pitch dark, only your cap lamp available, and then you end up in the work stope. And this is the platinum stope. Back there is the platinum, and this stope is 39 inches high. Not an inch higher because that's wasted rock. Back there is the platinum. So if it's 40 inches stope width, Mr. Drummond gets a heart attack. And it is a very uncomfortable workplace. 105 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 plus degrees Celsius above your head, 9,000 feet. On my first day, I was nearly killed by what is called a kukupan, a material car. I was strapped here against the sidewall when this loco came past, and this thing started wobbling, and it was the most scary moment of my life. Almost as scary as the next moment. As I got closer to the shaft, I nearly fell down the ore pass, hundreds of feet deep. They wouldn't even find my body. And this is my first day in this incredibly complex, high-risk environment. Now, a mine is incredibly treacherous. Just yesterday, this is a gold mine in Turkey where there was a landslide and a whole side wall of a pit collapsed by the looks of it. And this is pure rock coming down, forms a river of rock. And run down that killed 9 people yesterday. It is an incredibly risky environment at the best of times. Now, just to set my presentation up, I want to tell a story, a famous story for some people who's listened to my presentations before, about an elephant. For those who haven't heard this, this is very, very important for the theme of my presentation. This is a story of Grant Davis. Grant Davis was a young Englishman who grew up in Kenya, in Africa. And when he was about 8 years old, his parents, British, decided they're going to leave Kenya, they're going to go back to England, and he grew up in England. He was very sad to leave this beautiful country where he grew up in. Loved the wildlife, loved the people. Well, he grew up in Leeds, and he decided after he qualified as an engineer, he's going to go back to Africa and get a job as a gap year. And he's going to, and he got a job as a warden in a game reserve. And it was a walking safari. It's like you take tourists out in small groups into the wild with a rifle, and you actually explore this environment in the wild. Fantastic experience. He had a favorite spot, a water hole, that he would sit down with his group of tourists on a regular basis, sit down and watch the animals come in and out as they gather for water in the morning. It was a crisp day. They just settled into under the tree, and they started watching this when he heard this sound. And he immediately knew there's something wrong with this elephant. This elephant is sick or dying, or something is wrong. He told the tourists to stay back. He walked into this area, and it came from that bush back there, and he walked down here, and he entered it from the back very carefully with his rifle to investigate. And as he walked in, it opened into a clearing, and here was a young bull calf lying on the ground on the side, seemingly dead. And it had an odd color. It was like a yellowish color. He thought the elephant was sick, but then he realized the elephant is actually trapped in a wire snare, and he could see the wire snare, his right leg trapped and already swollen. This elephant is dying and probably almost dead. And he thought he's going to shoot the elephant just to make sure that he's out of his misery. But as he wanted to pull the trigger, the elephant's eye opened, and he thought, maybe I can save the elephant. He cut the wire off, and he pulled this young elephant by the trunk, and the elephant stood up and stood in front of him, and he stood back, and the elephant started walking away on 3 legs, bewildered, turned around, lifted his trunk and trumpeted loudly, and then disappeared in the bush. Well, Grant went back to the base camp. All this incident was reported, and life went on. He, in one of his touring groups in the next few months, he met a young lady from America. Marlene was her name, beautiful lady from Chicago. They fell in love, they started dating, and eventually they got married. And he returned to Chicago with her. And he found a job in a bank there as an investment analyst, and life went on. His son was born, little Grant, and him and his wife said to each other, one day we're going to show little Grant Africa as well. When little Grant was 5 years old, they haven't been to Africa yet, he decided to take his son for a day out on his birthday. And his son said, let's go ice hockey. And as they got to the ice hockey rink, it was closed. There was a gas leak in a pipe, and they couldn't get in. And he decided the zoo is right next door, the Lincoln Park Zoo. And he knows there's a lot of African animals in there. And he went in and he took his son for a day visit in the zoo. And he showed him all the beautiful animals. And as they come back in the afternoon, they walk past the elephant den. And here was this massive elephant standing there feeding. And he looked.
Excuse me, there's a problem on the call. There are people that can't hear or aren't connected. You might just need to say something.
Okay. Roon, I just got word that there's some people on a call who can't hear properly, can't connect. Are you aware of that?
I am not. They're in this meeting, but they're not able to hear you.
Yeah, there must be some connection problem for some people.
Yeah.
We'll leave it. Most people can. If you can hear me, most people can probably hear well.
Yeah, and we are recording the session, so people can
Okay.
come back, but I might ping Peter as well to see if there's any diagnostics you can do on your side on the audio.
Okay, sure. Anyway, him and his son walked past the elephant den, and right there was this huge African elephant. And as he pointed the elephant out to his son, the elephant suddenly looked up and started staring at Grant and his son, and started banging his right foot on the ground. Grant could not believe this. He stood back and said, "Is this even possible?" But the elephant started rushing to the fence and trumpeted, lifted his trunk up. Grant stood there, he pushed his son back, and he lifted his hand up and he tried to touch the elephant. The elephant started smelling his arm, and Grant moved a little bit closer, and the elephant put his trunk right around Grant's waist, lifted him up gently, and smashed him on those rocks and killed him. Now, I'm sure you feel a bit shocked at this stage at the outcome of my story, but it wasn't the same elephant. It was a different elephant. That's Africa for you. Now, why did I tell you the story? This story is going to flow through my whole presentation. I've told you an example of the possible but the impossible accident. And the impossible accident that suddenly makes sense, is all logical after the event, is also what happened in one of my first encounters in the mining industry with a massive disaster. 104 miners were killed in such an impossible accident. And this happened on a mine called Val Reefs in South Africa. It was a gold mining company, huge mining company, also had close to 50,000 people on various shafts. And on one of the shafts, this happened one day. The night shift employees went down the shaft in those elevators, as you've seen. They would get down to their level, they would get out, and they would start walking to their workplaces. And the day shift people who'd been waiting around would get in and they would get out of the mine. This is shift change. This is a very, very active part of the day when thousands of people are changed in and out of the mine in about an hour and a half. This is what it looks like when workers are waiting for the cage to come down to their level. And this is where the cages would stop in the back there. Now, a supervisor just got off the cage, walked past all of this, and as he was walking past, he noticed a loco parked where it wasn't supposed to be. You'll see in a moment what happened. He called a worker up and he says, "Are you a loco driver?" And the guy says, "Yes." And he said to him, "Move this loco out of this area. It's not supposed to be here." The guy jumped on the loco, and there's a dead man switch on it that you hit with your fist. Anything, you press it down and it activates the whole thing. But it's also got a forward and reverse lever over here. And he did it all in one hit, and he jumped on, and this loco started running. Unfortunately, not in the direction he thought it was. It was running towards the shaft instead of out of the shaft area. In his panic, because he lifted his hand from the dead man switch, but it's not working. It's actually still going. And the loco runs, engages with a man carriage in front of it, and started running towards the shaft gates and hit those shaft moments after a double-decker cage with 104 men in it had just gone past that level. It smashed through, broke the cables, and fell down the shaft and killed 104 people. Now, this was, of course, one massive event, one incredible disaster. The CEO of this complex, a guy with the name of Michael Prinsloo, whom I assisted in analysis of this, I asked him afterwards, how is it possible that a loco could fall down a shaft? Because it's just almost impossible. And he said, Corrie, I know. I couldn't believe it, because we've made it humanly impossible to ever happen again, because we had a shaft incident in the past. It destroyed the shaft. We know all about this risk. And here are the precautions and the defenses in depth that they put in place. The first one was a rule: no locos to be parked in that area within 33 yards of the shaft's gates unless it's attended. That was a rule that was broken. That's what the supervisor tried to rectify. They had farm gates, or gates, the miners call them farm gates, supposed to be locked 24/7. On this day, that gate was standing wide open. They had mall stoppers, steel bars plunged into concrete holes. On this day, a shift boss from another level was having a safety audit done on his level. He didn't have those stoppers in place. He came down, he took theirs to pass the safety audit on his level. So they were not there. They have aeroplane sprags, wooden crosses they place on tracks like this that would derail a runaway loco. On this day, there were supposed to be 2 of them in place. By rule, they were actually lying off the tracks. They had a tank trap that had rails that was cut off. The rails are cut off so that this tank trap would entrap the wheels of the loco if it runs away. On this day, those rails were not in place. They were later found not in a place, so they were left on the trap. The last defense they had was the shaft gates. The shaft gates broke off as it was made from wood, and they were supposed to withstand the impact of 2 locos, but the hinges were rusted through on these shaft gates, and no one noticed it because they were painted for the safety audits, and we found the same problem on all the levels afterwards. But here are all the defenses that failed that day. One after the other, everything. And we did a simulation afterwards and found that if the loco would smash through those gates while the cages were still coming down, it would not have had any people killed, but lots of damage. But it would have taken 31 seconds from that point to the next level where everybody would have been disembarked. And in that 31 seconds, everything went wrong. This is the impossible accident that in everybody's mind was just not going to happen, and it did. Now, in my career, when I started on this mine in South Africa, the company was called Gencor. One of the mines was called Kinross Gold Mine, and we had a disaster in 1986 when an underground fire killed 177 people. Now, this led to an elimination of fatalities drive. My first experience in safety was a Gencor safety review, which I designed for the organization. It was soon after this event. The company is now called BHP Billiton, or BHP. But what we did was a week-long review on the site with a team of 12 to 15 people that would go on the ground and would engage with frontline employees. And we did this at 62 mines. And it was basically a discussion with employees to uncover risks that they experience and see there. This was followed by another cycle of the same event. And again, we engaged at 62 mines. And this is also when I started my career as a safety consultant. And the next time I did this exercise was for a Canadian mine, Placer Dome, 18 mines around the world, which is today Newmont. And we did exactly the same process. But most recently, for Anglo-American, I was asked to help support this design and facilitation of this process. And here's what we did. We visited 42 sites. This company's got 90,000 people in it. And again, we formed EOF teams, 12 to 15 people that would come and engage with workers on the front line. We did 8,000 engagements. And then one of the organizations is a company called De Beers or Deb Marine, and they've asked me to design a process that would conduct these kind of elimination of fatalities on a continuous basis. And this was later deployed at another company called NAMDEP, Venetia and Venetia Underground. These are all diamond mining companies. Now, the Safe Sentry system that we've developed looks like this. And it's a simple tool, basic tool that we've developed over many years that basically provides a lens through which the workers do this identification. So one person in a team is a safe sentry for the day, and that safe sentry would engage with another employee or employees during the day, and they would have an app on a tablet, and they would conduct these critical risk observations. And 2 or 3 of these observations engagements would be done, and at the end of the shift, the supervisor would talk to the safe sentry. The information would be uploaded to a database, and this would be immediately available to the management of the vessel, of the ship, and the data is sortable. Now, Deb Marine has got many ships in Namibia mining diamonds from the seabed, massive operations, and on a regular basis, this would be reviewed by the COO, and the process would be conducted on a daily basis. And I'll show you some of the results a bit later on. But this is what the processes that inform what I call 7 missing links in safety. And this is from the perspective of practice into theory. And these are the topics I want to cover in this presentation. Strongest link in safety, accidental randomness, fear in safety, erratic drift of risks, trends in metrics, the why in safety, and the 3rd layer of risk. I'm going to start with the 3rd layer of risk. Now, when you look at a famous theory, the Black Swan theory that Nassim Taleb developed, and he wrote this book, which was really quite a eye-opener in the field of safety, but basically said that black swans can only be predicted retrospectively, not prospectively. And of course, he did this analysis in the financial world, and this started to become a typical term around in safety. There was another researcher, Didier Sonnet, a French guy, also a financier, who looked at many of the black swans that Nassim Taleb talked about and said some of them were actually predictable. And he created this idea, and he called them Dragon Kings, of catastrophic events that were predictable. Now, in safety, I changed the term to purple dragons. Purple dragons are black swan events that were actually predictable. And I'll come back to that. The next topic, the next animal that I want to introduce is the one I've already introduced, and that is my yellow elephant. Now, the typical description of the yellow elephants, it's discoverable. And you'll see the processes through which this is discoverable. And then the 3rd animal is the white slug. This one is only knowable. And I want to give you an example of it. On one of these ships of Deb Marine, a safe sentry did this amazing observation. He observed that there was a scuff mark on a downpipe on the side of the ship. And when he looked into more detail, he identified an issue at night. This is what happens during the nighttime. A security guard has to clean those cameras because they get foggy. And of course, this is a high security environment, but the security guard was a short guy. So he'd get on top of that pipe, that down pipe, and he would lean over the side of the ship in order to clean those down pipes. And the ship is moving in order to clean those cameras. Now imagine he slips very easily, very likely. He slips and falls over the edge and he's disappeared. The next morning, people would not know that how this happened. It was just this security guard missing, and the assumption would be that he's overboard. But they would never know how this happened unless this observation was available where this person, that little scuff mark, would be the telltale sign of something that could happen. And this is what I call unknowable. It is not knowable after the event, but it is knowable because it actually had precursors. Now, if you put this in what is a safety presentation without an iceberg, this is the visible side of safety, the visible accidents, the first layer. That's the hazards, risk-taking, incidents. Underneath that is the second layer, and that is the area of the threats that we know about. And this is the area of near misses, serious injury, fatal risks, energy exposures that we tend to talk about a lot these days. But below that is this third layer. And this is what I call the far miss layer, where it is not even possible sometimes to connect them. But like in this example I gave you of the white slug, these are the far miss events. And this is what is identifiable through the process of risk overlooked, misjudged, rewarded, pressured, inherent, and I'll come back to that. Now, underneath the waterline are these incredible situations of multiple, and we have identified, and you'll see the results in a moment, how many thousands of these actually exist in organization. But only when something happens as a black swan event or as one of these events do we identify those. And this is when it is too late to identify and discover the risks, but they've already existed. Now, this is the first topic, is the missing links. And in the deep safe environment, this deep safe theme is how do we define safety? What do we define as safety? Now, in a high risk environment, this is also related to this reluctance to simplify. And it comes down to this question: what is safe? Now, for a long, long time, we've identified it as the absence of accidents. And if you look at the absurdity almost of that definition, in order to achieve zero fatalities, we have to achieve zero serious injuries, and those are the area of risk management. But if we just focus on that kind of definition, we would have to then, in order to do that, also achieve minor injuries. In order to do that, we'd have to achieve zero incidents, zero near misses, zero error, zero risk, zero hazards, and eventually zero work. It is an absurdity in definition. Now, the more recent definition in resilience engineering is the presence of capacity or the presence of controls. But that had been very much in existence, in depth, at these organizations, who on the next day, after they've been classified for great performance in safety, they had catastrophic events. And I call them near zero organizations. There are many, many examples around the world of organizations who turned into catastrophic events momentarily on the last second. And they are characterized by, they targeted and achieved low accident rates as a measure of safety and got near to zero. They focused on safety as a core value and embedded in our culture, many statements from them. They were fixated on compliance and elimination of at-risk behaviors. Safety approach was in technology, systems, audits, enforcements, and control. And it almost looks like this is just well-managed companies. Now, the classic example of the HRO is the aircraft carrier. And I've done much research and reading about the aircraft carrier and talked to people. I employed people who actually worked on these aircraft carriers, and fascinating environment. Now, for those of you who don't know the extreme risk they experience on these decks, they have to land these jets at rates sometimes at 42 seconds apart at an incredible rate, and the jets would land. They would have to get entrapped by a cable to stop the speed, to lower the speed, and they have to catch one of these cables. They pull the plane out of the way, the next plane is on its way, and this happens in great succession. Incredible risk. And seldom do they have accidents. But when they do have accidents, here's an example of one on an aircraft.
As this single-seat FA-18 Hornet traps, the arresting cable stretches to the breaking point. When it breaks, the plane quickly disappears over the side and into the water. Training saves the pilot, who ejects immediately. This yellow shirt miraculously jumps the cable as it whips under him, not once, but twice.
When I saw this video one day, it was like connecting the dots. This was, in the back of my mind, the ultimate definition of safe, because this is what I experienced in the environment where I worked, where safety is not the absence of accidents or the existence of defenses and protections. It is the readiness to respond to risks relentlessly. And that was like an eye-opener to me in terms of understanding and connecting dots of my own workplace, my own work environment. And that's a readiness to respond to risk relentlessly. It can be embedded in the culture of the organization, in the systems, in the processes, and in the skills of people. And there is a model that evolved over time that I developed that would take all these definitions and put all of these factors into place to understand the spread and width of how we can actually deploy that definition of safe in an organization at various levels and various processes. The next topic is accidental randomness. Now, this is almost a given. Randomness is part and parcel of everything. The gas pipe leaking in my story was a random event. But to go back to my Gencor mine, this gold mine that had this disaster, 177 people killed, here's how it happened. 2 Boilermakers went underground and did some repair work on some rail lines. They put the gas bottles to a side and started welding and cutting on the rails. It fell over during the operation of their job, and the nozzles got knocked off, and it caught fire, and it started injecting a flame against the sidewall. Now, the sidewall was sprayed with a substance called Regiseal to protect rocks from falling on people as a safety measure, but it was also flammable. They only discovered afterwards. It was a product out of the United Kingdom. And this gas that was made from polyurethane, and the gas went down the tunnels into the stopes and killed 177 people. Now, if that just fell the other way, and it happened exactly the same way, no one would have been killed. What are the odds? 50-50 for that to happen if just the other way. Randomness, a great determinant almost in that outcome. Now, there's an example of a disaster in Canada, the Lac Mégantic derailment disaster that happened in Quebec. And it was a process that, this is 2013, 2015, I think, if I'm memory, but a train was stopped for the night shift, for the night. The driver got off, and it was a fuel train, fuel tankers. And another driver would come the next day and would take over. Now, the normal procedure is the train to be secured, tankers to have brakes secured on them, 7 tankers at least, and the engine would run through the night with the air brakes on, and this then was the process. But during the night, as this train was standing waiting, a fire started on the train, on the loco. The local fire brigade came out. They shut down the train engine to shut down the fire, to extinguish the fire, and they let the management of the company know. And unfortunately, because the air brakes was not functional, the mechanical brakes on the tankers were not enough to hold the train. And the train started running. And it was running unattended. It was 1 o'clock in the morning and smashed, derailed in the town of Lac-Mégantic, and changed overnight that town to that. And 47 people killed in this disaster. Now, every night, there is a train lines filled with these fuel tankers on North America. It's an incredible array of trains and hazards and risks existing. And to a large degree, this is all purple dragons sitting and waiting every single night. Now, while everyone was focusing on trains and fuel tankers, in Ottawa, just 6 months later, in 2013, a train hit a bus at the intersection and clipped the front end of it, and 6 people were killed in that. If that happened 1 second later, just 1 second later, 72 people would be killed in that bus. If it happened 10 seconds earlier, they would have been standing at the intersection and they would be staring at the purple dragon, and no one would even think of it. This is the coincidences, the randomness. Now, if you look at this issue of random risk exposure, how do we actually deal with this? And in our perspective, the answer lies in random risk systems. And I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. Erratic drift of risks. Now, if you look at this little funny video clip, as we treat risks, something happens and we put a new rule in place, a new procedure. We change the dynamics of the risk and a new risk emerges. And I won't go into the details of this one, but basically, because of an accident happened on a haul road on a mine, they passed a rule that no trucks can be overtaken anymore by small vehicles. And it changed the whole dynamics. And instead of people not overtaking trucks and avoiding that risk, they were now rushing other trucks at intersections, and they were getting in front of them. And they have a risk of being run over. And it is just a change of dynamics that happens here. But if you look at this famous little event of Abraham-Wald, where these bombers were shot down by the Nazi forces. This is the Lancaster bombers in the Second World War. And they would be protecting these bombers with armor on the engines and cockpits, but they still get shot down. And then they gave this problem, as the planes would return with all these bullet holes, they gave this issue to Abraham-Wald and say, where should we put more protection on? And Abraham-Wald apparently said, well, none of those areas, because those are the planes that came back. So we don't know where the planes were shot that didn't come back. And of course, they were shot not where the bullet holes were, because otherwise they would not come back. And this is where they would be shot, right near those high-stress areas. But this is, if you look at the famous Swiss cheese model, this is how we would also treat situations. We would plug the holes in our defenses based on incidents that happen. But what we're not looking at, what we're not looking at is the cheese, where the purple dragons are. And we inform ourselves in terms of risk by risk matrices, and this is what we think the risk situation looks like. It's static. It is very much a quantification that gives us a false impression. Because risks are dynamic, they increase in likelihood and in severity, etc. But they also move around in the organization. They are not static in terms of positioning. And it is a bit like if we look at risks with a telescope, this is what we see, and we define our risks in terms of what happens, and it's working at heights. It is all these definitions we put to it in terms of the energy wheel, but this is actually what happens in an organization. And we do not have this capability of scanning that environment in a dynamic way, in a random way. And if you look at what this migration of risk and dynamic risk discovery gives us, is what is happening with this safe sentry system, where there's a continuous focus on discovery of risks, a continuous analysis of risks, little risk calculators that's built into the app. There's a continuous verification of controls, and there is also a continuous focus on reducing risks. This is a dynamic, fast-paced, rapid risk management process that happens on these vessels on a continuous basis. If a risk is identified, it is immediately treated and handled. And this is a constant process that happens very much every single day, rapid risk reduction on these vessels on a continuous basis. And it's a random process that creates this capability. Now, we look at, and as part of this whole focus on this sentry system is what we call the strongest link in safety. Humans are typically seen as the weakest link. Also in my example, Grant was the problem by doing this fundamental mistake there by messing with an elephant. But if you look at how we typically look at humans in safety in many ways, we look at people as the weak link, and these are the things they do typically wrong. And this is me on a motorcycle in Australia on a hot day, and you can see I'm not quite well properly clothed for this activity. But then there's other kinds of human error that exist.
Texas rat snakes are going to be one of the largest snakes that you find in the Metroplex area.
He doesn't, maybe you didn't see that, but it's a little lizard on.
Texas rat snakes are going to be one of the largest snakes that you find in the Metroplex area.
Or kind of mistakes that we have no control over, like this is clearly a white and a gray squares or rectangles. But if you just put a gray band over it, they both turn into gray. And if you don't believe me, you can put your hand in front of your eyes and you can just block out that middle and you'll see how it changes. This is just inadvertent mistakes in our perceptions of risk. If I ask you what is here, everybody will say, oh, there's a cup, a mug, coffee, probably with a spoon in it. And most people would say spoon, but there's an assumption that it's a spoon. It could be a fork. Now, this assumption played a role in the events at Piper Alpha, where there was a fire on Piper Alpha at 10 o'clock at night, and a mayday was sent out, and all the other oil rigs kept on producing oil. And on the assumption that Piper Alpha would get the fire under control, because they have advanced fire detection systems in place. Now, of course, what happened on that day at Piper Alpha, there was a scuba divers in the water during the day, and Piper Alpha actually had their fire extinguishing systems shut off. So it didn't come on, and everybody was assuming that it would. And in that situation, the same mistake we just made with the spoon, everybody assumed, and this accident occurred. I'll give you another quick example of human error. Basically, all I'm going to ask you to do is add up numbers. And this is a chemical plant with chemical tanks. And they have to avoid pushing too much of this chemical number 2 into tank number 1 as a procedure annually to empty tank number 2. But if they mix these chemicals too much of tank 2 goes into tank number 1. This mixture becomes explosive and it can actually cause serious damage. So they have 8 sets of crews watching the flow rates, making sure that not too much of 2 goes into 1. Now, they all made a mistake that night, and here are the mistakes. In your mind, just loudly as you sit there, add up, take 1,000 plus 40 plus 1,000 plus 30 plus 1,000 plus 20 plus 1,000 plus 10. Most people would add up and say it's 5,000. The answer is actually 4,100. Now, almost another inadvertent mistake. Now, the last mistake I want to quickly share with you is Daryl, a carpet layer in a small town. And he works for a company, and he goes to this lady who wants new carpets, and she said to him, you can start the job now, it's Wednesday, but you must be finished Saturday afternoon because we have a party and the whole town is going to be here. And he promised her the job would be done. Now he has a dilemma. What must Daryl do? What should Daryl do? Most people say Daryl should lift the carpet up, but that's too much risk for him because he might even be fired by his boss if the job is not done. And what will Daryl do? Most likely, and the customer is extremely happy. You'll see in a moment.
This looks great. This must be yours. I found it on the kitchen table.
Thanks.
Mommy, have you seen my hamster?
Well, isn't he asleep in his cage?
Have you seen my hamster then?
No.
But only go upstairs and look thoroughly. I mean, sure. Probably behind the bed like where you found him last time.
Okay.
Now, of course, the problem is not solved for Daryl because he must now come clean. He must tell this poor lady that this poor little girl that her beautiful little hamster is actually dead, and imagine he will traumatize her. So he may not even do. This is what faces employees on a day-to-day basis. Mistakes we make can have such dire consequences. But if you look at the array of mistakes that sits in front of a supervisor, a manager, these are the typical things that happen. I showed you, which are different in intent, and on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, completely inadvertent. And you can see that these are all very different mistakes. Yet, and instead of learning, we can train, we can change procedures, we can coach people. I'm the only one that should be disciplined there because of my careless behavior, reckless behavior in what I've done. When an accident happens, it changes to blame, to rebuke, to punishment, and discipline. And this is the 3 people involved in Lac Mégantic disaster. The guy, Tom Harding, is the driver of the train. The other 2 are managers. And this is a shameful picture of what happened in Canada. They were actually arrested, simply doing what they would do on a normal day-to-day basis. So when we look at this weakest link in the safety chain, in terms of the safe-centric process, it is a shift into humans can be the strongest link in the safety chain. And instead of looking at people in this way, we can also look at people in a much more positive way. People are imaginative, passionate, inspirational. Humans are actually extraordinary. And the kind of things that people can do, and these type of human behaviors, you would often not see in a safety environment. These are great things that people can do. We only look at what they cannot do. And let's look at improvise. And I'll just use one example because every one of these have got great examples, and a very famous example, humans can improvise. And this is the example of Captain Sully Sullenberger when he landed that plane on the Hudson that day. And very famous event. Here is the sound.
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280. You can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? Cactus 1549, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle 54718, turn left bank 210.
In that moment, he made a decision that is incredibly courageous on the one hand, but improvising at the moment, and he saved the lives of those 152 people, including his own. And for every pilot error, if you read any example of an airplane crash, it's always pilot error. But what is never known, never mentioned, is that for every pilot error, there are thousands, hundreds and thousands of pilot saves that happened. And here is a classic example of disasters that never happened as a result of the safe sentry process. I told you about this example of a mine disaster in which those 104 people were killed. Now, this almost exact situation played out on one of the participants in this process, Venetia Underground Mine, where they've actually discovered and looked at a situation where something could fall down a shaft. And the person who did this observation actually wrote about the Valreefs gold mine as an example. And in this example, this was identified and prevented. The Valreefs, the Piper Alpha disaster, these are the 5 key reasons that played a role in this disaster of Piper Alpha, in which 167 men died. Now, here is an example of 80 sailors who did not perish in a fire because the disaster did not happen. Just like this Piper Alpha sits on a seabed, these ships of the Marine operate on the sea and is extremely treacherous environment. Now, here's some of the things that has been identified by the safe sentry. Gas pipe leaked on Piper Alpha. Here is an example of a acetylene pipe, and this over here is a power cable. And when the safe sentry lifted it up, he noticed that the acetylene pipe had been shaved through as a vibration of the ship's movement, and this was some time away, and this would have started leaking in the area of electrical cables, etc. Incredible discovery. Water deluge system shut down on Piper Alpha. Also on one of these vessels, the water deluge system was shut down during the day, or the fire detection system was shut down during the day because of smoke in the Boilermaker shop. And when the safe sentry got there in the evening, discovered that it was not switched back on, just like in Piper Alpha. Water sprays, the deluge system at Piper Alpha not functioning, discovered a similar thing at one of the vessels. And here's a classic example.
This is an excellent observation. All of us in the engine room department has been walking past this vent for years, and we never saw this. You cannot stand high up and try to close something in that position.
On Piper Alpha, the ventilation deficiencies and failures was a key reason why the smoke was actually the thing that killed people on Piper Alpha. Smoke inhalation, 167 men there. And here is a classic example of somebody that found something was overlooked for years. Now, in this process of the safe sentry at the various companies, Deb Marine, Namdeb, Venetia Open Cut, and Venetia Underground, this is what in the 2 years maybe that this has been deployed. This is the incredible capability of people. They have identified 513 potential catastrophic exposures, 506 multiple fatal exposures. 1,700 possible fatals and 8,000 serious injuries, 11,554 serious and catastrophic events, all identified and treated on a rapid basis, as against discovering when when failures already occurred. The near misidentification, if we just focused on that or just on accident, would not see a fraction of this, and yet they are incredibly capable to see these things and to identify and to treat them. And this is what leads to this conclusion almost. Humans are not the problem. They're not just the solution. They are the strongest link in the safety chain. They're the most potent risk system we have. Trends in metrics. Of course, you may have noticed on the gate there of Lincoln Park Zoo, your safety is our priority, and we are now 3,417 days, 0 accidents. And this is the absurdity of this whole focus of 0 accidents. And related to this area of looking at far misses. But if you just look at this intersection and you think about, how did you arrive where you are today safely? How do you know you arrived there safely? And the answer would be, I'm here. I'm physically here. But this could have been you in your car, and just watch what happens after you've left this intersection. And that car shoots through there. It could have been you. It could have been any of these people here that had been in the way. And slow motion, the person did not touch anybody. Nothing happened. Most people in that environment wouldn't even know what happened. But in this environment, everybody arrived alive. Nobody got hurt. That's ExxonMobil's famous slogan. Everybody goes home in the same way they come to work. 0 accidents, 0 harm. And this is the part of this whole issue of safety myth. Safety is not 0 accidents. And it's this focus on small accidents in organizations that often lead to us missing the big events. And typically, as you remember from the Deepwater Horizon, this is what happened the night before on that vessel.
The tension in every drilling operation is between doing things safely and doing them fast. Time is money, and this job was costing BP $1 million a day. The day of the accident, BP flew several managers to the Deepwater Horizon for a ceremony to congratulate the crew for 7 years without an injury. For 7 years without an injury. 7 years without an injury. For 7 years.
Of course, no one in this room on this virtual connect call would believe that they worked on that oil rig for 7 years and no one had a scratch on them. It was clearly a manipulated situation in order to achieve the awards, etc., the recognition. And while it is famously said, what gets measured in safety gets done, what gets measured in safety gets manipulated. And here is an incredibly powerful graph. I cannot give you the industry because they don't want me to discuss the industry that this happened in. And this is 28 companies in that industry, large organizations in the United States, where they've been arranged over on the graphs, on this graph, on their DART rates. So over here you have the high-performing organizations, the benchmark organizations. Over there you have the dogs who are 4 to 5 times worse in their industry rates, in their injury rates. Terrible companies on the right-hand side. When it was looked at what happened in terms of fatalities, over 12 years, 34 fatalities occurred, and that's where the fatalities happened. 21 of the 34 fatalities occurred in the top performing organizations. They, in combination, had more fatalities between them, between those 7 organizations, than all of the rest of the industry put together. Now, this is the world of the metrics of safe. And we're not dealing with the signals of safe. And I want to share with you the signals of risk that is possible in terms of measurement. Distinction between what has happened, what is happening, and still to happen or not happening. And this is a little model from Eric Holnagel, the near misses, the hazards, the serious injury events, the incidents. This is what has happened and is happening now. And this is where we measure lagging and leading metrics. This is the numbers in safety. Over here is what's possible, plausible, imaginable, inconceivable. And this is the signals. And this is where indicators are passive, latent, drift, or inert. And this is where my array of animals live. And this is the signals in the business. And I want to share with you some of these signals, and I call also the silences. And this is a range of indicators that we've now developed over time as a result of the Safe Sentry system. Passive indicators, latent indicators, drift indicators, and inert indicators. And I won't go into too much detail, I'll just show you examples of two. One is the ratio between hideable and non-hideable reports, so to speak. So, and the other one is the 6Y ratio. Now let's have a look at this first example. This is an employee in a warehouse, and he's moving that pallet, and then he catches the shelf and he pushes it back. Now, this is one event. Here's another event, also with shelves, and the forklift is coming closer, and then touching it, and everything collapses. Now, there's a huge difference between these two events. In fact, in terms of outcome, but in terms of likelihood, it's like virtually the same. Now, if you look at this one on the right-hand side, if that driver of that forklift doesn't report this, it's completely hideable. No one will ever know that this is happening. On the one on the left, it's non-hideable. And here's what we discovered in this process of those mine sites that we looked at in terms of maturity, and found that on mature mine sites, for every one non-hideable near miss, there were 4 reports of hideable far misses. So people report things they don't have to report 4 times more than what they report things they can't hide. On the immature sites, it's exactly the opposite. And I had a quick scan at Deb Marine the other day and looked at, they're now running at a ratio of approximately 23 hideable risks, far misses, that if people did not report it, no one would know, to every one non-hideable. This is extremely powerful stuff. This is metrics that we never had. And if you look at the classification of those typical different types of engagement with risk, this sits on the app of the Safe Sentry, and they classify each risk. Is it overlooked, underestimated, was a shortcut taken, or on the other hand, is it the result of work pressure? Is it inherent in the design, or is it tolerated? Now, this makes up 2 sides of this equation. On the one side is these are cognitive, behavioral, or downstream risks. On the left-hand side is systemic, cultural, upstream. So basically, this is what happens downstream. People overlook, underestimate, or take shortcuts. This is what happens upstream. It's inherent, tolerate, or balanced. Now, we looked at the incidence of this in the process of an organization. Upstream in the organization is where things are inherent, tolerated, and pressurized by work pressure. And this is downstream. Now, if we have too much risk classified as inherent, tolerated, or balanced, it would continue to pump risks into the system because it's tolerated, and it would be an unhealthy situation. So we set a target, not more than 40% of risk that the Safe Sentries see at the front end should be inherent, tolerated, or balanced. And we started measuring that. And this is what some of the outcomes are from these measurements. And you can see this is Deb Marine, and 70% of the risks are actually downstream, are overlooked, shortcutted, and underestimated. And very small proportion, 32%, is systemic. And this is how they initially were operating inside of that equation, and slowly and gradually they started looking more proactively at risks in their environment and managing them more upstream. Silences are more important than the noise we measure. The aspect of fear in safety. Now, my example of the elephant example is Grant did not show any fear to the elephant. But this is what happens in safety. And of course, if we apply the hierarchy of control, we're going to put more controls in. We'll put booms in on both sides now that cut across the road, both sides, so that people can't drive through, which is what they've done in this environment. And then we have this kind of human reaction. Now, what is the psychology behind this? This is a pedestrian crossing, and something goes wrong, and he gets seriously injured. This is the famous Pulpit Rock in Norway. To this day, I constantly Google this, to this day, had no fatal accidents, anybody falling over that side of that cliff. No fence whatsoever. And this is inherently what is mindfulness. But if you build a fence, what's going to happen? Well, it will probably be what happens at the Grand Canyon, where people have got fences and protection everywhere, and we're averaging, I think, 12 fatalities a year at this moment in the Grand Canyon. And people do silly things. And this is the area of risk homeostasis, a very famous model in safety. Professor Gerard Wilde developed this, a Dutchman. And a classic example is when Sweden changed from driving on the left to driving on the right on the roads in 1967. And that's the morning of the first morning after the event. No one knew what to do. It was chaos, and then gradually started moving on the right-hand side of the road, as the rest of Europe was. And this is what happens in the safety statistics. The accident rates dropped down dramatically, stayed low for 2 years, and then gradually increased. Now, I've seen this idea of risk homeostasis as people become used to the environment. I saw this in action. A company in Australia in early 2000 asked me to develop, after they've had a fatal accident in this workplace, this is road repair crews, to install proximity alert systems on their machinery and on people. And it was a great opportunity for me. They were building a tunnel in Brisbane. And over a period of almost a year, we had this crew to our disposal. And we put electronic receiver on the roller. And we had transmitters in the vests of the workers. It was an amazing success. Incredible. Because the workers are now suddenly warned when they're too close to the roller. But here's what I noticed. And this from sketches I've made all through the time. Before the proximity alert system was on the system, workers were about 6 to 7 yards away from the roller, moving slowly forward as it approaches behind them. And they would look back at this roller all the time, aware of it. But somebody got killed like that. But here's what happened. After we put the system in place, proximity alert systems, workers were now waiting for the alarm to go off. No one's looking back anymore, and they just wait for the alarm. So I've literally installed a system to potentially kill people in this whole process. Now, if you look at how do we drive safety in organization culturally, we start with a focus on zero injuries, and incident rates come down. We start looking at zero accidents, and then we start looking at rewarding safe behaviors, and gradually we shift the culture into anxious mode. We start punishing at-risk behaviors and becoming zero tolerant if people don't follow those critical rules, and it starts to become a fearful culture. When we start to reward zero, like they did in Deepwater Horizon, the culture starts to become toxic. And these are just my terminology. In this toxic environment, where there is this fear to fail, there is a tendency for distorted news to move up the organization and for no news to go up about bad news. It stays down here. Bad news stays down in the organization where we operate in the stopes. Now, this is what I call risk secrecy. It was very evident at Piper Alpha when the manager was challenged afterwards. Why did you not know of all these mistakes and problems you had? He said, I thought everything was okay because I never got a report anything was wrong. But it goes on. This is more modern times. We develop now a more modern focus on safety, psychological safety. We want to create trust and dedication and care in the organization. Great things happen. And yet we are creating a new kind of cult. In this cult, the accident rates are coming more down, but the serious injury and fatal accidents are actually increasing. And this is, to my mind, very noticeable in this graph here, where these are the organizations on the left, which would have been on the forefront of creating trust and dedication and care, and they had the bulk of accidents, fatal accidents. And you can see, and I'm wondering, to what extent are the increase in fatal accidents globally and in the US related to a different kind of culture, where the fear to fail is replaced by the fear to disappoint. And it is the same thing, except good news are now pushed consistently up the organization. And not only is bad news contained, it is suppressed. I've had a classic example. I did a culture survey in Australia in 1999, and this was amazing. This happened before 2 accidents occurred. One, this is the site number 3 there, was the 3rd most positive site in our database at the time. They were extremely focused on safety. And right on the right-hand side, you see site 42 was the most negative site and the worst safety performance. And both of them had disasters subsequently. And if you look at what happened, the one had no bad news going up the organization as a result of fear. The other one had just good news going up the organization all the time. And the result is the same. Now, this is my elephant story. When I told you the truth, it was extremely uncomfortable. It hurt. It created tension. You didn't like my story. But that is what we are not getting in organizations anymore. And this leads to this fear of failure that in our environment, we focus in this safe-centered environment on the pursuit of perfection. And it's almost as if we're dropping and relinquishing this pursuit of perfection. We're saying 0 is not possible, and of course it's not, etc. But we are also more allowing people in this toxic environment, in this cult environment, to fail more safely, to be more psychologically safe, more comforted. Are we needing some mental stress and tension reinserted again in organizations, or settle for mediocrity? The last missing link is the why in safety. Now, one of the things I love doing at these exercises when we go into the mine site at the beginning of the week is ask the management, why do you want safety in your organization? And they would constantly answer and say, the reason we want safety is because we're concerned about our people and the safety. We put safety first. We put people first. It's not about accident numbers. It's about taking care of people. However, when you go out to talk to the workers, you ask them, why do management want to be safe? They will tell you it's because they're under pressure from their work bosses. They say they're committed, but they don't act this way. It's to have less accidents. And this guy on the right-hand side was a dozer driver who told me on one of these excursions on the mine site saying, you know, when it comes to safety, management's lying to us, and we are lying to management. And this is what we done to Mr. Drummond. We lied to Mr. Drummond all the time. And there was a series of events when I got my job as HR manager eventually. And one of the first tasks I had to do was to go out after a fatal accident and give the news to a young family. I convinced Mr. Drummond to go with me because he didn't want to do this initially, but I eventually convinced him to go with me. And this is what happened that day. This is, as we walked to this house, this is the house where it actually happened. And I remember distinctly how there was bird sounds in the sky and kids playing in the backyard. When I knocked on the door, the lady opened the door and was immediately distressed because she knew we are from management. What is happening? Her husband's name was Danny. Now, I haven't got too much time to tell the story, but basically what happened was in front of this, Mr. Drummond and I were sitting there, and we had to relay the news to his two daughters. And it was just the most devastating experience for both of us. A day that changed Mr. Drummond. Mr. Drummond became a pioneer in safety in South Africa at the time, and a deeply, deeply dedicated human being from, you could almost say, from Gaddafi to Mandela. And it changed my life in so many respects, and it changed the lives of thousands of people after that. And he took upon himself the custody of safety. And I saw this custody of safety one day when I walked down on a mine, and in front of me was this young man, Vusi Mashlangu. And here's what happened. As we walked down towards the shaft gates, this is during a consulting exercise I was doing there, he was walking in front of me, and this aeroplane sprag was lying off the track, as I mentioned to you in that example of the mine disaster. And he stopped, and he put his foot on it, and he pushed it back onto the tracks. And I was wondering, why would he do it? No one else did it. No one bothered with it, but yet he did. So I asked him, and we speak a language on the ground that's called Fanagalo. So I asked him, why did you do that? And his answer was this. And translated, this says, I'm just deeply worried that if a local run away, it can kill people. And this struck me. There's a value set in Africa called Ubuntu. And if you Google Ubuntu and Nelson Mandela on YouTube, you will hear him talk about this value. Ubuntu means I live through you, you live through me. We are all custodians of care. And it was this custodianship of care that answered to me the question, what is the why of safety? Apart from all the grand things we do, the metrics, the systems, the perfection of processes, in the end, it is about the you in Ubuntu. And if I can conclude, in terms of what we've done with the Safe Sentry process, we've redefined aspects of the HRO principles. And the first principle is clarity. Learning is too late. Learning from accidents is too late. We have to understand and get clarity at the front end of the organization. Readiness to respond to risks is a powerful definition of safe. Discovery of these far misses, these silences in the organization are far more important. And then this continuous reduction, rapid risk reduction in the organization, relentlessly pursuing that perfection. It's about competence, the competence of people in the organization, where humans are the strongest link if you equip them, if you authorize them, and if they share with you the purpose of the organization's focus. And then finally, as I mentioned, is this custody, the custody of care. If you have that custody in the organization, the actions of Vusi Mashlangu is invisible. It's inherent in what we do. And these are the factors that come together in my final equation. The elimination of fatalities is mindfulness and those three C's. And we have the rapid reduction of risk functioning as a constant part of this process. And that's the equation. Rapid elimination of fatalities is a function of the mindfulness, competence, clarity, and custody. And that's how I build that 3 R's. This comes together in Africa. There's Abe Gubegna wrote this in a book one day. He's a novelist in Africa, saying, every day in Africa, a gazelle wakes up. It knows it must run faster than the fastest cheetah or it will be killed. Every morning a cheetah wakes up. It knows that it must run faster than the slowest gazelle or it'll starve to death. It doesn't matter whether you're a cheetah or a gazelle. When the sun comes up in Africa, you better be running. Now, this to me is a graphic display of what safety in motion means. And this is a safety slogan of one of my clients in Spain, Cepsa. And I thought it's a beautiful, beautiful picture. Safety is created. Safety is created every moment. Safety is created every day, every shift, every job. It is always in motion. What we've done yesterday is brittle. It fails, it falters. We have to recreate that capability, that readiness every single day. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you to the Beers, Deb Marine, Namdeb, for the opportunity to display what they do at their organization.
All right, well, thank you so much. That was incredibly informative. I'm not sure, have people been posting questions in the chat?
I don't see any.
Yeah, I know I got a couple direct messages. So if you directly message me instead of the entire group, if you can just kind of copy paste your question over. I don't want to ask a question that you don't want to ask anymore. While we're waiting, Leonard has a question. I see a raised hand. Go ahead, Leonard.
Yeah, hello, good evening. From Durham, England, UK. I hope you hear me well.
Yep.
For me, the idea of reducing fatalities completely is a very interesting one, a very honorable one. But is it nevertheless entirely possible? And because especially the point about the fence, you losing your mindfulness, a number of fatalities of accidents, serious, non-serious, that we just have to accept, that we have to be maybe prepared for to happen, because, or at least acknowledge that they're actually productive in a positive way for our safety culture, because it constantly reminds people to be on their edge, to be aware. Or is that something that you would say you can still reduce and you just shift it maybe in a digital world of simulations, of trainings, where you create environments where these areas or these accidents can happen? Thank you.
If I can answer your question backwards, how do we, does it serve a function in organization to remind people that accidents are possible and it's creating awareness? That you can do without having people killed. That awareness can be created, like I've shown there at Deb Marine, with 11,000 risks identified. They use that information proactively. They don't want to learn from accidents. They want to learn from risks and learn from these observations. That is far more honorable, I'd say. Now, coming back to your question, can it be eliminated? That's 2 answers to that. One is a moral perspective, and probably a physical perspective. And from a physical perspective, the world is inherent of risk. We will never have a fatal-free world in any shape or form. But from a moral perspective, the pursuit of perfection is actually far more powerful than the learning from failures. the pursuit of perfection, and this is where I have sometimes a problem with the old notion of saying we shouldn't talk about zero because I understand it creates all these downsides and negative responses and elimination of information organization. I know that too well. But the pursuit of perfection is actually creating a readiness in the organization, a constant tension and focus. So I'm also concerned about psychological safety. It creates us comfort with what we have. It's almost mediocrity in action. I'd rather have at the front end of every organization employees who are stressed to focus on perfection than comforted by their own mediocrity. So that to me is like the kind of double-dosed answer to your question, if I may.
Thank you very much. Could I follow up and maybe add, because I have a civil defense background, and for us, disaster dementia, especially in the realm of politicians or even the own organizations, is something that is, I would say, very widespread. Preparing for the last disaster is another very routine occurrence. So can you upscale these systems to apply to entire nations, to entire governments in the perspective of disasters? Or is it something that is only for you possible to do in a corporate environment where maybe that is way more controlled, or the rewards to be prepared, to watch out, to be mindful is a different one?
Yeah, I think it's probably not scalable to government and politics, political level. I think it's managed at the corporate level in organizations. It is a contained environment where you can actually apply the right rewards and recognitions and do the right interventions. It's much where it'll be functional, I think, and which way it'll be successful.
Thank you.
Not seeing a hand raised. Maybe we shift over to the chat. I do see some questions posted for you, Corrie, in the chat.
Yeah, there is one. Do you have any advice on coming to a root cause or root cause analysis tools or root cause analysis tools you like? I struggle with a little bit with root cause analysis in the sense that it looks at a picture of accidents just as it happened. It doesn't cater for that dynamic situation in a like I talked about randomness in risks, and so it's a static process that kind of like cuts out what has happened to this point. That same accident would not happen anyway in that same way. It's not. It's almost like you learn, and it's not going to be needed in the next stage because it's not going to happen like that. If I can put it in simplistic terms. I am working on a model of dynamic risk analysis, dynamic accident investigation, dynamic accident analysis. But it's early days on that, so I won't want to talk too much about it, but something that could, almost like we do this random risk identification process, discovery process, can we do a random risk analysis of accidents and have the same, much more powerful outcome on that one. Someone said, where can we find more about your work? Just our website, safemap.com. I don't see any more questions in there. Roon?
Yeah, there was a question about the technology vendor for the alarm system using the paving example.
Oh,
next question.
What is the technology vendor for the alarm system used in paving example? Well, that's something that we developed. And I actually shut down that whole thing because I was thinking to myself, I'm creating a system here that's going to kill people. Today, proximity alert systems are everywhere. And you'd be surprised to know that in South Africa, I think it's actually the most advanced. I have encountered mine sites there that everybody, thousands of people on the mine site, has proximity alert systems on them. And I've seen this issue also there, that people are becoming almost comforted by this process of, I've got an alert system on me. I'm very concerned about the proliferation of proximity alert systems. We we're creating a monster, in my opinion, in this regard. So you can find that technology on the internet quite widely.
If others have questions, we can take more questions in the chat. You're also welcome to raise your hand. And it doesn't have to be questions. You can make comments. You can also highlight examples where what some of the things Corrie's talked about resonates or that you've seen in your work. That's always a helpful, handy contribution to the conversation as well. John, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just very taken with the idea that psychological safety can be leading people in the wrong direction, as you called it, mediocrity in action. And I'm wondering if that is really certainly those who are advocating for psychological safety would argue that it's the opposite, that it's allowing you to talk about things that are, it's allowing the information to flow upward and sideways, etc. So I appreciate a little more explanation about what the pitfalls are of how psychological safety is being implemented.
Certainly, John, and I well aware, agree with you. Yes, the intent of psychological safety is to create more information in the organization, to create more openness and transparency in the organization. But what that does in practical situations, in practical implementation, it creates a huge demand for good news. And this is the essence of my elephant story. It's a good news story. You wanted to see, in the end, you wanted to hear, oh, he met the elephant and the elephant put him on his back and they walked off into the sunset. It's all great stuff. Now, this is what happens in safety. Safety becomes a good news story. And as we implement psychological safety, in practical terms, in practical deployment, it creates comfort zones for people. People don't want to be stressed, and people want mental wellness, and it's all associated with that kind of focus in organizations. And while we talk more readily about risks, we are also, it's a double-edged sword. On the downside of that, it creates a deeper reluctance to talk about good news, talk about bad news, because the organization is so kind and caring and wants good news in the organization. And I don't know at what point it shifts from being a powerful presence in the organization, which it is, to a downside where it shifts into a cult. And it's a bit the same like a religion. You know, a religion is good, create great behaviors, but a religion can also become a cult, and people can drink Kool-Aid. And this is what I see in the extreme in that environment. So it's a double-edged sword, and I don't know where that dividing line really comes into play. I just see it happen.
Did that answer your question, John?
Yes, well, that it certainly clarified that this is something that's been observed multiple times. So it's a danger. I'm still struggling a bit with the mechanism and with where it's gone wrong, in essence. Certainly not the intent of the psychological safety folks. You know, they would argue that what they mean by psychological safety is the tolerance of the organization for bad news. So, you know, that what's being described here is the opposite of psychological safety. But a psychological safety program has led to what was the opposite of what was intended.
Absolutely. I think it's in the practical interpretation of it. What is psychological safety when it's getting down to the front end employee? Is it really there creating a comfort to speak up? Or what message does it give employees at the front end? If we also talk about we care about employees, we care about safety in the organization, we committed to safety. All those positive elements start to become part of the message about psychological safety, and it does not create that almost discomfort courage for people to actually speak up and out in a comfortable way. And it is more how it's translated at the front end rather than what's intended at the front end in the design of it.
Yeah, it sounds to me like related to what you were talking about before, which is a fundamental mistrust between workers and management, that they don't believe that managers want to hear the truth, that they have to hide the news from them. They don't believe that managers really are trust them, or vice versa.
Actually, what I found very strongly, John, and this is a long story, it could be long story, but I'll tell you in short what happens. In organizations, the drive for safety comes from the top. And that's where the psychological safety intent is, and that's where we want to have things happening. But what happens is that also workers are now seeing management much more often in their workplace. They're kicking tires with us, they're talking to us, and all these messages come from the safety department, all these messages come from the communications department. And here's what happens in practice. The middle management gets bypassed by this messaging. It goes straight to the worker. And the worker is now the focus of psychological safety and all the speaking up and engagement systems, management visibility, visible felt leadership, etc. So what does the supervisor and manager, middle management do? They focus on the job because somebody's still got to get the job done. And they tend to become the custodians of production, and senior management tends to become the custodians of psychological safety and safety. And it's this two-way system that evolves in the organization. And I think there is where the interpretation is going wrong. It doesn't go straight through the line from the senior to the middle, to the supervisor, to the worker, because we've got all these players on the side and all these concepts on the side that muddies the water a lot.
I appreciate that as almost a political rather than a cultural explanation. Who's got power, who's looking for their interests, how do we advance ourselves and our interests within the organization, and they're not, those are not aligned, those different stakeholder groups, as you've expressed it. So that's given me a lot to think about. Thank you.
Sure. Maybe just in one of the examples, as I said, we engaged with 8,000 workers plus in this exercise, and one of the teams I encountered on a coal mine was the most amazing team I've seen, speaking highly of their supervisor, of their manager. And I wanted to meet the manager. And I actually asked to meet the manager in the afternoon, and I met this guy, and he blew my mind. When I asked him, how often do you get underground to talk to your workers? And his answer was, as little as I possibly can. And when I said, why do you say that? He says, they've got supervisors. They lead themselves. They need me when they've got issues and problems. I'll sort that out. But I'm not there to kick tires with them. I'm letting them lead themselves. And to me, that was almost the opposite of what we now see in terms of management visibility and management here and management there. You need to empower and authorize and share your purpose with that team on the ground, and they, in your factory floors, they will do what we want them to do in great ways. That's just an aside comment.
Yeah, any other questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Raise hands while we're waiting. Corrie, one of my colleagues, Aya Mitroff, that's on the call here, is emphatic with the idea of having an appreciation, understanding of what the assumptions that go into various systems and processes. I didn't hear you talk specifically about assumptions in your presentation today, but what's your experience been working with organizations where those kind of operational assumptions or baseline assumptions are accessible and transparent versus organizations where no one has any idea of what's going on with fundamental assumptions or kind of operational assumptions? Just do what you're told.
Well, my experience with these organizations where the safe sentry process is deployed is there's a deep understanding of the value of people in the organization, valuing people in the organization. So that is a fundamental, if I understand the question correctly, in terms of assumption. is that we can actually engage with employees. We can create a non-hierarchical process here that allows information to flow from the lowest level in the organization to the highest level in the organization in almost immediately, overnight. And we will deal with that in a constructive way. And the manager of this one organization, of one of the organizations, the Marine, said something to me one day very important. He said, "We are soft on people, but we are strong on standards. We are hard on standards." And I think from an assumption perspective, those are two assumptions that can coexist and should coexist, because we should not relinquish the fundamental controls, political controls in the organization, and allow those kind of deterioration, erosion of fundamental issues in terms of risk controls and risk compliance in the organization to evolve. So I think that's the kind of two assumptions that can coexist there.
Yeah, no, thank you. We're in the last few minutes of the meeting. I do see Richard posted a question. Do you have any comments on the work of the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board? Yeah, are you familiar with that organization? And
I'm not too familiar with the work of that organization.
Okay. And Richard, you're more than welcome to follow up with a follow-on question. Was there something specific? Were you thinking that was a good organization that's doing work that's aligned with the concepts that Corrie was presenting today?
One thing I just wanted to find out is whether Corrie has seen anything. Basically, this is the CSB is an agency of the U.S. government, and its purpose is to reduce, risks, reduce, make, I guess, companies aware of risks that they have for specific incidents that have occurred. So I would be very interested if Corrie could take a look at their, the things that they have done. They have investigation reports going back to 1990 or late 1990s, and also have put together for many of these videos of what happened, and I'm very interested to see what Corrie's reaction would be if he took a look at some of these at some future point in his presentations.
I can certainly do that. And
that's all I have to.
I can do that and connect with you afterwards, Richard.
Yeah, that's always nice to have give out the homework assignment. So Corrie, you'll have to go and do your research, and you can come back and report to the group on what you learned. All right, let's see. Another question from Dennis. So what's your take on the Human Performance Improvement, HPI, and ISM, Integrated Safety Management? Where do they fall short? Are they outdated? You're playing both sides of the blame and point of failure.
Well, I think, human performance improvement and all these terminologies we use, human and organizational performance issues, they all play a key role in the progress of safety as a science in one way. But in the end, safety doesn't want to be a science in the first instance. It wants to be a function in an organization. And the kind of tools and concepts and models that exist in the academic world, in the theoretical world, is not always translatable to the real world. And where they are translated, it's with great difficulty. So like this safe sentry system is a bottom-up development. It was developed from a practical need in an organization, not only for human performance improvement, but for the improvement and for the elimination of fatalities, the prevention of fatalities in these organizations, which is the fundamental, the holy grail. And in that process, you know, how do you integrate this more into the organizational processes? So if you mentioned ISM, integrated safety management, one of the most important goals for me is to create safety as an invisible force in the organization, to create it as such that it's so integrated into the operational process, so becomes so routine in the organization that it's just what we do. And in order to do that, we have to make them streamlined. We have to make them agile and simple and focused, as against, you know, having a system that's elaborate and heavy on the whole production process. Because in the end, we have to serve that production process and make that process the most efficient and contribute to it, and not delay it or slow it down. I hope I answered that question correctly, or in some way.
Well, you got to thank you. Thanks, Dennis, for the question. So we're probably in the last little bit here. Maybe we'll take this opportunity to thank Corrie again for the wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And there will be another CCRM presentation in March, and the details of that will be posted on the website. So Corrie, thanks again for your time today. Very interesting and engaging presentation. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for attending.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Arun, for your facilitation and help in the process.
Oh, my pleasure.